Hey Jake, how's it going, man? I didn't meet you last time. I met Josh at the screening at the Georgia event a few months ago
Well,
with
you were better off, I'm telling you.
I'm going to turn the volume on my computer down a little bit because I think it's just a little too loud. So I should wait another minute or so, see if Dennis or them or we can just get started now and maybe they'll pop in while we're going. So welcome to Sarasota. We're the at the Fogartyville Media and Arts Center. Let me see, I'm gonna get this so we can see as many people as possible. All right, so I'm gonna sit off to the side over here. And we just got through watching it. Man, that's intense every time I see it. Um, oh, well, by the way, so we just got through seeing for the record and the recording, the Animal People 2019, based on the Huntington lab protesting and whatnot. And actually, my opening question was for Dennis and Cassie.
Josh does a great Dennis impression.
Oh, does he?
Yeah.
In Q&A. So I'm just going to ask you guys, in lieu of the filmmakers not being here yet, in this process that you guys started back around 9/11, when did the filming start with Dennis and Casey, and was it just footage you guys shot on your own personally? You compiled, and how did you guys all get together and decide to make a film, a documentary about all the whole record over 10, 15 year period?
Well, gosh, actually, it went through several different directors. We were initially contacted by a gentleman out in New York who he was working as a sound engineer on The Sopranos. And strangely enough, he had originally intended to make a documentary about toothpaste. Um, he, as he began doing his research, he was looking into the companies that manufactured it, came across some information on the internet about how it was animal tested, and then bumped into an article about the campaign. At which point he reached out to our co-defendant, Kevin, and said that he would like to make a documentary about SHAC. Um, Over the years, though, I guess he decided that it wasn't something he was going to be able to bring together on his own. He brought in some producers, and eventually, from my understanding, they reached out to Dennis and Casey. Some of the footage was filmed during the trial. I know that um, Kevin's husband, Aaron, had a camera that he took some of the footage with, but um, yeah, it stretched over a really long span of time, and I was interviewed by multiple different people during the course of it all.
Of course, that time had to cover the time that you guys were in the federal penitentiaries, the 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, and 5 years for Kevin, I think, which is that's just something. Injustice is a big thing I have a problem with. I was just wondering, when it comes to protesting, I saw that you had a couple people in this that were from the ACLU. Did you guys have any ACLU videographers or any requests for the ACLU to observe your protests or anything at any point?
Mm, I think more than likely we worked with groups like the National Lawyers Guild. After we were arrested and we were looking for um, attorneys to help us, I think it was Kevin and myself went to New York City to this ACLU gala because they would never return any of our phone calls or talk to us. They didn't want to be involved with us. We put these like press packets together and like basically like did a run in and was like, can you please just look at this information and help us? This is like a really, terrible thing that's going on around First Amendment issues, and they were not interested at all. If I remember correctly, was when it became the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. I think the ACLU was like okay with it. They were like, this isn't a big deal. When they strengthened the law that we were found guilty of the Animal Enterprise Protection Act, they used our case to strengthen it to the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. And the ACLU was consulted in one way or the other and kind of signed off on it, if I remember correctly. Josh might remember some more.
I remember that the same as you do, that during the congressional hearings on it, they said that they didn't find any civil liberties issues with it.
That's pretty shocking. Maybe you guys should have done it in Sarasota because we're pretty effective here. We had did some activism back in 2018. Is it 2018? We got dog track racing banned in the state of Florida. It's actually is it in the Constitution? Is it an amendment, or I'm not sure how that works politically or legally. We also did the protesting against Ringling Circus, which had them give up their elephants, which led to them going out of business for the first time in their 100+ year history. And then only recently reopening like 2-3 years ago, but with human animals instead of, non-human species, which is interesting. Just curious about the lawyers. You guys had, not to, insult lawyers, or we have one in the house today, a friend of Kevin's, Brenda Carey, not sure if you know her or not. But we, as far as the lawyers in the court, I didn't hear anything or sense anything that they were trying to object to narrative or opinion pieces or rhetoric, or just object to everything or dismiss the case flat out with lack of evidence, because there was no crime except the crime of terrorism, which is such a broad term. What was the thinking around that? Did lawyers just accepted the charge that was given as terrorism and then work with that? Or, because I would have probably been upset if that was happening to me. I would have got really mad, man. I don't know how I would have controlled myself,
Yeah, we should have gotten mad. That would have done it. And I think
you're accused of crime, you might as well do it,
I think the situation that is was multiple issues. One was it was the largest case of its kind ever. This wasn't like a simple criminal charge, or this was like legitimately the second largest FBI investigation of the time. We were 5 times larger than that. So when it's like I don't know, if people aren't quite familiar how it works, but you get discovery in the process of all the evidence that the government potentially could use against you, and they give it to you to look through to build a defense off of. That discovery filled up 2 huge rooms at the courtroom. They had to give us a judge's quarters that wasn't being used anymore, simply to fill the discovery. So yeah, our attorneys, probably could have done a better job. But to what extent, who knows? It's to mount a defense like that is incredibly costly. It's and we had 1 or 2 attorneys that we tried to pay, and the rest were public defenders or court-appointed attorneys. My attorney, who was a nice guy, and to a certain extent, he tried. He raised objections and filed things and looked out for me the best that he could. But his main work was in real estate law. But I don't have $200,000-$400,000 to mount a defense against the largest case of its kind, and neither does Josh, and neither does the rest of us. So you really have to do what you can, and do the best you can. But there also is an ethical issue around, like, we're 6 people. How much money do we take out of a grassroots movement to mount a defense when you have thousands or tens of thousands of other people trying to organize for animals at the same time? So for me, anyways, that was the issue as well. It's like, yeah, we could try to raise $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 to mount a defense for 6 people, but is it worth it? I'm not really sure. And the other thing to remember is that the federal system has a 95% success rate. So if you go to trial or you get prosecuted by the federal system, you have a 95% chance of being found guilty. So it is incredibly stacked against you. So part of me is like, yeah, our lawyers could have done a much better job. We could have had much better attorneys, but also like they were after us from the very beginning, or as you can see in the movie, before the beginning, they were out to get us. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to mount a defense against.
Oh, yeah, it was interesting. I previewed this last night so I could come up with some questions, and I never paid attention as much as, in the first viewing of it as I did last night. And I was really shocked when I reheard the Animal Enterprise Terrorist Act. Like, I didn't even hear about that. I've been vegan since 2002. And none of the news about you guys, I paying attention to because of everything was about 9/11 and going after the terrorists of that and stuff. So, I mean, that's pretty serious. So I'm actually rethinking a lot of things that I want to do now. And I don't do protests directly myself. I have a little, issue with controlling my anger. In a public scene like that, I don't know if I could, I probably would get arrested just for disturbing the peace. But we move forward, I heard something by Mother Teresa. She was asked if you would lead a protest, and she says, no, but if you had a march for peace, I'd be in the front line. But that doesn't really get a lot of effective activism done in every case. So moving forward in this light with this terrorism act, I'm surprised nobody got arrested in Florida for banning dog track racing and protesting outside the pet land and the Ringling Circus. But maybe they're just not a multi-billion-dollar corporation like the Huntington. So what kind of advice of what types of, well, I got what Kevin said at the end of the movie. He's still fired up. I mean, I'm like that too, but I got 30 years left of activism, and I don't want to spend any of it behind bars, if you know what I mean. It really sucks that this kind of policy is out there now, and the speciesism in the government is so stacked against us. What are your thoughts on, like, I've seen Kevin do the Beagle thing. What are you guys doing now, and what kind of activism can be done effectively now with this kind of law?
I guess I'll jump in here real quick. Um, I guess I guess the first thing I'd like to say is that what happened to us is often sort of presented as an aberration, as something that's outside of the norm in American courts, and that's not really true. If you go back through the entire history of the United States, you'll see that um, dissidents have dealt with all sorts of false imprisonment, mocked up charges, and of course, a lot worse than that. I was reading recently about the Battle of Blair Mountain, which was the second largest armed conflict in North America outside of the Civil War. And it was striking coal miners in West Virginia who were trying to prevent scabs and union breakers from coming in while they were on strike. And the US Army was called in, and over 1 million rounds of ammunition were fired at them. I think about the Black Panther Party in the 1970s, and how you had activists who were framed for crimes they didn't commit. Geronimo Pratt spent decades in prison for a murder that the FBI not only knew that he did not commit, but they knew who did commit it. And so what happened to us was certainly unjust. But it was very much a part of a pattern that we see throughout the history of the United States. Um, my grandfather, actually, most of my family had been in the military. He was in the army, and I remember him telling me when I was very young, he's like, you know, you have the right to freedom of speech, but you don't have the right to be heard. He's like, the moment people start hearing you, they're going to kill you. Um, and certainly we can see a lot of examples of that. So I think we always knew, I don't know if Jake would agree with this, but I think we always knew that prosecution was coming, that what we were doing was challenging people who are powerful enough and connected enough that on a long enough timeline, that was probably going to be the end result, that we were going to be prosecuted and eventually end up in prison, whether we were following the law or not. So, as far as advice, I really don't have any. um, in the United States, I don't think there are that many examples of stepping to large corporations, to multinationals, especially ones that are connected to, say, pharmaceuticals, which is the second largest lobby in the United States, and coming out coming out unscathed. I always tell people to lawyer up. I always tell people to, know the law as best they can. But I also tell people to study history and to be honest about what the results can be when you challenge power.
Thank you. Great answer, man. Appreciate it. So I also heard in there about following the money. And that's always something I did. I was in the military police in the 90s, and I did stuff like this myself to find out truth to certain answers. When it occurred to me, hearing that is subsidies of meat and dairy. Now, talking about going after the money, how would something like ending subsidies against meat and dairy go? You guys have any thoughts about that? It's a tough one. It's not a corporation, it's the U.S. government, but our tax-paying dollars. Do you guys know anything about that?
I know that happens. I think that, that's a tough one. I think it's a much bigger issue than I think the animal rights movement is probably capable of tackling right now, unfortunately. Doesn't mean that it's not happening. There are groups and people like Connie Spence that are have gone to DC and started organizations as lobbying to lobby against lobbying. I think there are people that are starting to see how awful and lobbying is and how corrupt it is. But I do think that when it comes to meat and dairy, and I think when it comes to the animal rights movement, we have to be realistic about what we can and cannot achieve. And I think that we can achieve those goals at some point, but I don't think the iteration of our movement currently has the ability or the strategies and the tactics to go after something as huge as that quite yet. I always think of it as if we all got together and started playing soccer on the weekends, and then on week 3, we're like, how come we haven't won the World Cup yet? Well, it's because we haven't practiced and we haven't figured out how to play as a team, and we haven't figured out, the tactics and strategies we need to go and become a better team. And so I do think that we have the ability as animal rights activists and a movement to do really important things and change things for animals. And you've done that, of course, in Florida with the circus and the dog racing. But I don't think we have the mass mobilization at this point to go after successfully something as large as the meat and dairy lobbyists. It doesn't mean that we can't do things against the meat and dairy industries. There's been a lot of successful pressure campaigns against individual projects and construction of slaughterhouses and processing plants. And there's really interesting things that are being done outside the animal rights movement with environmental organizations and human rights organizations that are, combating somewhat successfully the meat and dairy industry. But that also requires the animal rights movement to be mature enough to be able to work with those folks without passing a lot of judgment on them based on dietary issues. So I am hopeful that the movement can get to that point, but I'm not so sure we are at that point quite yet. That's my more depressing answer to your question. Maybe Josh can sprinkle some optimism in there.
Oh, we all know how optimistic I am. Mr. Optimism here. No, I think that was a great, valid answer.
We just had a loss here too. Amendment 2 got passed, which the NRA was behind. I don't know if you guys heard about that. We call it the Forever Hunting Amendment because what it does, there's already a right to hunt in the Florida state constitution. And what they did was they suspends all the conservation work that we've done for years and allows anyone to hunt at will with any means necessary, including snares and all that darts, poison dart, anything, as the primary source of conservation in the state. So they just kept putting the thing out there, and it was occurring to everyone that it's the right to hunt. But there wasn't enough countering to that until the last week when it was already a few days into voting already. So we lost on that one. But on that note, I want to pass on the microphone to anyone who wants to ask questions themselves. Right, here we go. Some.
Hi. Oh, great documentary. Very impactful. I think I'm going to have nightmares tonight, though. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions. First of all, I think that, unless you can afford the dream team like O.J. Simpson, you could have prevailed. When you talk about court-appointed attorneys, they're usually not equipped to prevail in trials. I worked in criminal courts for 25 years as a certified court interpreter. I'm very acquainted with court-appointed attorneys, and they usually don't do trials. And to be writing an opening statement, which really does so much for the beginning of a trial, on the fly like that, it says it all. But money talks, and when a poor person or a normal person does not have the money it takes to win in a trial. I wanted to ask if you all are in touch, and if you stay in touch, and if you're still working together on anything as a group. And the second question backs up to 9/11. Do you think that the beginning of your activism came pretty much on the heels of 9/11 or in that time frame? Do you think that the sensitivity against terrorism had a part in the severity of the treatment against you all? In other words, kind of making you what do you call it? Targets, or trying to use you as a model to go after terrorists. Do you think that since you started, I think you said like a year after October of the following year, do you think that came into play?
Well, SHAC actually began prior to September 11th. I was actually in New York City on September 11th because I had produced a campaign video for SHAC that featured footage of Huntington Life Sciences being raided by the Animal Liberation Front and beagles being removed from inside. So while I was giving a talk one day in New Jersey, the FBI had subpoenaed me. I was living in Little Rock at the time, but I had friends in New York City, so I'd stayed out there for this grand jury. And I was at my friend Benjamin's house, and I remember his housemate shaking me awake and saying that a plane had just hit the World Trade Center. We were in Long Island City. I remember going outside onto Ditmars Avenue, up onto the elevated train platform, and seeing the second plane hit. And I called the prosecutor out in New Jersey because my grand jury date was scheduled for the following day, and they had shut down all of the trains and all of the bridges going into New Jersey. And again, what they were investigating was people rescuing beagles from a laboratory, and here thousands of people had just died in this horrific action. And the prosecutor told me that he didn't care if I had to swim to New Jersey, that I had to be there the next day or they would hold me in contempt. And so the next morning, following this horrific thing, I remember the New Jersey PATH trains had finally opened, and you had to walk through this like phalanx of police and National Guard with machine guns to get down onto the platform. They made you go one at a time to board the train. I finally got into New Jersey, and then I end up at this courthouse where the little room they had me in before I got called, they had armed guards on my room over a video of people taking beagles out of a laboratory. And it really sort of showed me what the priorities were and how serious they were taking us, despite what seems like should have been the greater priority for them at the time. But SHAC was part of a continuity of a number of campaigns at the time. Animal liberation and environmental radicalism had sort of reached a zenith by the end of the 1990s and going into the early 2000s. There was a lot of money, a lot of very well-connected industries at the time that were pushing for prosecutions. And what September 11th did is it created an incentive for people who worked as U.S. attorneys, who worked in law enforcement, that if they were going to try and gain promotion, if they were going to try and make a name for themselves, they really needed to get a terrorism feather in their cap. The FBI at that time was suddenly tasked. I mean, it's the largest national law enforcement group, federal law enforcement group, and it was suddenly tasked with stopping terrorism, which is a crime that almost never occurs. And so when you have these tens of thousands of agents who are suddenly tasked with stopping something that never occurs, and they're all trying to get a paycheck and impress their bosses and show what they've been working on, if you can't find terrorists, what you do is you create terrorists. And so in our case, of course, the term terrorism, it didn't apply to us. Of course, that wasn't an accurate description of us. But in the days after September 11th, if you could portray somebody in that way and get a conviction anyway, it was going to be good for your career. And if you were a senator or a congressperson, and you were being lobbied by, the pharmaceutical industry to shut down this very effective campaign, passing laws that were going to portray us as terrorists, were going to be a feather in your cap as well. So it increased the incentives, certainly to frame up innocent people. But at that time, I mean, Jake and I had been doing activism together. I think the first time we met would have been in about 1996. And I think investigation, law enforcement was sort of a running theme in our lives, something that we had always dealt with. We'd been out sabotaging a whale hunt prior to the SHAC stuff. And I mean, there was a joint terrorism task force involved in investigating that. I'm sorry, I don't know if that got to all of your questions. Sorry if I tangented a bit there.
Kind of makes me think of someone winning an election based on characterizing illegal immigrants as rapists, killers, and criminals. There's so much about your story that is going on right now as far as freedom of speech and quashing college students for saying things that certain people don't like, and there's just so much there. There's just so much there. But are you all still like in touch, all of you, all six, or have some kind of try to make a life for themselves, a normal life?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's also, part of the thing with the prosecution was less about getting people that were responsible for the things they were opposed to, and rather trying to break up a movement. And so part of it is like when you go to prison, obviously you can't talk to one another. Before we went to prison, we were on house arrest for 6, 9 months, and they made it really difficult to communicate that way. And then when you get out of prison, you're on probation. And when you're on probation, you can't have contact with people that are also felons. So, you know, we all did, between 1 and 5 years in prison, and then got 3 years of probation. So, I mean, you're looking at almost 10 years of like not being able to communicate with one another. But that's not to say that we aren't, still friends and talk to one another. But yeah, I mean, you get older, you have things going on in life, and you organize and do different things. But so we're not like all organizing together. That'd be fun though. Just get the band back together. Just start a campaign. But yeah, I mean, after you go through something like that, how could you not have some sort of bond with the folks that you went through it with? And like Josh said, we've known each other since 1996, and have had, as far as I'm aware of, being investigated in one form or another from 1996 to 2013. I mean, how could you not build a bond with that much scrutiny, together?
Is Huntington still open today, the lab?
It merged. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, the lab itself physically, is it still there? Or they're still doing testing on it there? It's 2025 now. That film was done in 2019.
So Huntington did merge with a number of other labs and became a company called Invigo. Invigo lasted for a couple of years and then was having its own financial problems. My understanding is that at this point, nobody who had been involved with the HLS merger of Invigo is still there. They sold their laboratories and their intellectual property rights. So there's still something operating under the name Invigo, but it's not under the same ownership it was. There's actually a book that had come out last year from one of the British SHAC defendants. One thing the movie doesn't mention is that we were rounded up all across the world. SHAC was active in 18 different countries. There was a big Interpol operation called Operation Achilles, and they took out basically all the main organizers there as well. One of those defendants, Tom Harris, wrote a book called Your Neighbor Kills Puppies last year, and that sort of brings everything up to date as to 2024. It also has a lot of revelations that we didn't know about at the time that the Animal People was being filmed, including some of the big financiers behind the push to prosecute us, and then how our prosecutors here in the US went to England to advise them on how to get prosecutions even against people who weren't guilty.
Wow. That's pretty interesting stuff. The Zoom has got us capped at about 3 minutes, 2 minutes now. I don't think we have any more time for, unless somebody's got a burning desired question. All right.
Because I just to thank,
Yeah.
just to thank them. I think I speak on behalf of our entire group here, just to thank you and your co-defendants and all the teams and the people that you work with for all of your amazing work, and we really appreciate that. And appreciate it. And obviously, sorry that we had to go through what we did, but you know, we really honor that and appreciate it, and yeah, so thank you. And thank you for being with us tonight as well.
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Is there, before we go, Zoom kicks us off in 1 minute and 30 seconds. Anything you guys want to say, since, you know, I saw you, Josh, in the earlier screening this year in the Georgia group. The things have been going on in your minds in the last few years that you want to share with people, like in this kind of a scenario or situation right here? Just anything in general that comes up to you?
Sure. I would say that the point of that prosecution is to scare you into not being active. And so when we take a position of inactivity, they're winning. So I always encourage people to not be afraid of what you see in this movie in terms of prosecution. It doesn't mean to approach them recklessly, but I do think that we need to approach our activism with the understanding that we can win. We have the ability to win. You guys have proven it there with things like the circus and the dog track. When we build community and people power and mobilization, we have the ability to change things. And that scares the government and it scares those corporations. But ultimately, that's what we need. We need them to be on the defense, and we have the ability to do that. So I would encourage everyone to find ways to become active, fight for animals, fight for humans, fight for the environment, and do it smartly and strategically so that we can win.
Thank you, Bob. Zoom is going to kick us off in seconds. So thanks again, you guys, for coming out tonight. I wish Dennis and Casey were able to get on, but